Good evening. It is a rather eventful day for our family anyway. We got to go back to Leonard this afternoon, and one of the elders there was celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, and Julie and I got to go up and celebrate with them, and it was good to see friends and familiar faces of, it seems like a long time ago. And, it's funny, when I moved here, my kids were little bitty, and when we left Leonard, all those kids were little bitty, and now they're all really big. And it's amazing how nature takes its course and changes what was once cute and innocent into something that is not so innocent anymore. That's what I mean. They say that you can tell a lot about a man by the company that he keeps. The people that he surrounds himself with identify those things that he finds attractive, or the things that he finds entertaining. It's also said that you can tell a lot about a man by the car that he drives. Is it flashy? Is it fast? Is it something that is more moderate? But I say that you can also tell a lot about a man by the checkbook he keeps. The Bible tells us that there's a certain way that Christians look. We've been engaged in this idea of kingdom first living. What does it look like to live the kingdom first in our workplace, at school? What does it look like to live the kingdom first in our daily life? What about our recreational life? Or what about other areas like our family? But tonight we want to look at what kingdom first living looks like in our checkbooks. Sometimes we may not think about that, but the Bible says clearly that there is a difference in the life that we lead before we are Christians and the life that we lead after we are Christians. In Colossians chapter 1 and verse 13, he says that he has delivered us from the powers of darkness. And so we have this picture of the powers or the dominion of darkness as it is pressing down upon us in this oppressive way, that it is pulling us and separating us away from God. And it's as if God has reached down to rescue us and has delivered us from the oppression of the kingdom of darkness. But then it says that he transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. We know that this, of course, is Jesus Christ, and that our lives have been changed from that dominion of darkness, and that we have been placed, or we might say planted, into the kingdom of his beloved Son. And in that kingdom, life is different. If we are living our lives the same as we always have been, then we might say we are doing it wrong. Many have destroyed their earthly life through the misuse of their checkbook. You think about 1 Timothy 6 verses 9 and 10 when he says, But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare. A snare is a trap. It is laid in wait for those who are unsuspecting, and when they come along without checking their steps, the trap is sprung. They are ensnared. He says that those who desire to be rich fall into the temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And it is through this craving, this desire to be rich, this craving, he says, that some have wandered away from the faith and have pierced themselves through with many pangs. It is not a pretty sight when we paint the picture of those who desire wealth, who desire to be rich. Now understand, there is a vast difference between those who love money and have a craving for more and more and more, and no matter how much they get, they are insatiable. They want a little more and a little more. There's a difference between that and those who put their hand to the plow and don't look back, and in the end of life, or maybe not even quite even to the end of life, they look back and there's a sizable amount of money there. Having riches is not sinful. Having great wealth is not something that God condemns. It is the attitude we have toward that wealth. And so we identify as kingdom first living, there is a certain attitude, there's a certain appearance that Christians have. The revelation of a person's character can be seen then in his checkbook. or the expenditures of his records. You know, a few years ago, it came out with the debit cards. I don't know if y'all remember when debit cards first came out, but I remember when we got our first debit card, it was a certain amount of freedom. You know, not having to have writer's cramp for writing so many checks, to be able to go out and buy things. You know, it's almost like the freedom of a credit card, only this was the debit card. And you know, after you've used it for a while, it wasn't unfamiliar to us to every once in a while go through the register or go through the statement and see an unfamiliar charge. You know, something we weren't expecting. And usually with just a little investigation, you say, oh, well, you know, I bought something online from that. And it was usually my fault, of course. You know, I bought something online. Yeah, the name of the store is this, but evidently they charge it to that, and it was the same price. Not a big deal. But you can imagine my shock and surprise one day when Julie and I are going through the register, and there's like $1,000 charged to some cigar store in Florida. And I'm looking at that and I said, but Julie, your favorite shop's not even in Florida. I didn't know where in the world it came from. Well, you can imagine, we did a little investigation and found out that our card had been stolen, identity is stolen or whatever. But you see, when you look at that, it identified something about us, didn't it? Could you imagine seeing Julie's bank statement at $1,000 for cigars? What would you think of my wife? See, it would say a lot about us if you were able to look at that. And of course, I tell you that because it was fraudulent. I quickly add that. It was fraudulent, and the charges were erased, and we didn't have to pay any of that, and they sent us a new card, and everything was hunky-dory for a while. But that's just the way it goes. It uncovers our priorities. It may uncover our secrets. It may point out poor management of our money. But kingdom first living ought to be seen even in our checkbook register. And so there's some principles we want to put into place. We want to see what the life that is living kingdom first is going to look at. And first and foremost, when it comes to our checkbook register, we realize that it's all God's, every bit of it. It's not what we give to God on the church that belongs to God, but every bit of it from beginning to end belongs to God. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and all those who dwell in it. Psalm 24 and verse 1, he says that everything in the earth belongs to God. Every resource, every animal, every human being, all belongs to God. At no point can we say, this is mine, but only we say, this is what God has given me. This belongs to God. Hence, everything that we have and everything that we own, every resource that we have in our control, we are simply managers of because it belongs to God. We need to have this understanding of stewardship in order to please God. You see, if we start thinking, well, this is mine, I've worked hard, I've got all of this, I put my hand to my plow, and I used my skills and my wisdom and my knowledge to get my money. You know, if that's your attitude toward money, God doesn't even want it. Look at Psalm 50, beginning in verse 9, when God says, I will not accept a bull from your house, or a goat from your folds. For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. God is saying, look, you look at me like I'm some depraved God that lives in poverty, and I'm waiting on your table scraps, and that you are so gracious to give a sacrifice to me. God says, I'm not going to take a goat from your house. I'm not taking a bull from your flock, because every beast of the forest is mine. And a cattle on 1,000 hills, the cattle on 1,000 hills belong to me. God is not taking it from us. He's not accepting it from us as if He ought to be thankful. God looks down and knows that He owns all of these things, and they are simply giving back. And once we realize that, then that it is all God's, we understand that we are only managers or stewards of what He has given us. In 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 2, and talking about the gospel and taking the gospel into all the world, he says that we are stewards of that gospel. We have been made ministers, and it is required of stewards that they be found trustworthy or faithful. Now we know that Paul specifically is speaking of those who are stewards of the gospel, which is every Christian, but the principle applies across the board. Stewards must always seek to be worthy of that which has been entrusted to them. Be it the gospel or money, either one, it all belongs to God, and we're just in charge of managing it. And in fact, we will be judged by how well we manage that. Second principle is there are really only three ways to use money. There is, we can spend it, or we can save it, or we can give it away. We're going to look at each one of these three and see how our lives will be affected if we're living kingdom first in each area. First of all, kingdom first in spending is that God gets first priority in all matters. In Colossians 1 and verse 18, he tells us that Christ has the preeminence in all things. That includes, it is not limited to the church, but it includes the church, and it includes our finances, our checkbook register. In 1 Corinthians 16 and 1 and 2, we are told that we are to lay by in store as we have prospered. And so we give Him of our means as we have prospered. And we say, rightly so, as they did in Deuteronomy 18 and verse 14, that we give of the first fruits. The Jews were to give the first fruits of your grain, of your wine, of your oil, the first fleece of your sheep, you shall give to Him. And so when we sit down and we make the budget and we talk about the things of life that we're going to spend on, we spend first and foremost God. Not the table scraps, not what's left over. Not looking at our checkbook or our finances and say, well, see, here's all the things that I have to pay this month, and when I'm finished, I will give God a portion of what is left over. No, we take the first fruits, the cream of the crop, and we pass that to God. Secondly, we spend on priorities. Secondly, we spend on our families. 1 Timothy 5 verse 8 tells us that if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for the members of his household, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. We are going to be judged by if we take care of our families. And how sad it is to see people with new boats and new cars and a new set of golf clubs asking for handouts, or with families whose clothes are tattered and their bodies are riddled with dirt and filthy because they can't pay their water bill to take a shower. Does it happen? Absolutely. All around us. We are surrounded by people who put the emphasis in the wrong place. God comes first, and our families must come second. And that means that we pay our bills, and we secure food and clothing and shelter for ourselves and our families. Doesn't mean that you have to have the nicest clothes in the world. We're not talking about that. It doesn't mean that your house has to have 15 rooms and be 5,000 square feet. Not talking about that. We're simply talking about taking care of our families, that they do not go hungry, that they are not exposed to the elements, and that they can look decent and modest when they go into public. And then you can enjoy the fruits of your labor. Solomon said over and over in the book of Ecclesiastes things like, behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 18. Same basic thing. Eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of your labor. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 13. That we should enjoy our work. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 22. It's okay to get a boat if you've put God first and your family second. It's okay to have some of the more frivolous things of life. And yeah, they're frivolous. But that's okay. You want a new dress? Get the new dress if the bills are paid and God is put first. You want a new pair of shoes to go with that new suit? That's okay. But make sure that God comes first and your family is second and taken care of before you start spending on the things that are not as necessary. And then finally, when it comes to spending on lust, just a couple of things, or spending our money. Number one is do not spend on our own lust. You ask and you receive not, because you ask in that you may, or you miss, that you may spend it on your own lust. James 4 and verse 3. Make sure that you're not buying the cigars. Make sure that you're not buying the beer and going to all the bad places. Because when you look at your register, you don't want it to reveal a life of sinful vice, but a life of kingdom first living. And secondly, don't mix up the priorities. Don't put the boat before God. Don't put the family before God. Put God first and foremost, and everything else will settle out. Isn't that what Jesus said? Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. We spend it. Number two, we can save it. And sometimes we look at the Bible and we see warnings against miserliness or hoarding money and keeping our hand away from helping those around us. And obviously that is wrong, but saving money is important, even in the Bible scheme of things. It is to be our income should we live into retirement. I realize that sometimes we may die before retirement. Solomon says, if you put all of your eggs in the basket of, I'm going to save up this money, save up this money, save up this money. And he says, you may die before you get to use it. And then whose money is it going to be? He asked that question. But that money, if we live into retirement, needs to become our income so that we are not a burden on society, or worse, a burden on the church. And so we save money and we invest it. Now, the parable of the talents is a good illustration. The underlying account. The Lord goes into a far country and He calls His servants. And He gives to one 5 talents and one 2 talents and one 1 talent. He goes into the far country for a while, and the one who had 5 talents goes and he goes to the marketplace and he buys and he sells and he gains 5 more talents so that he has 10. And the one who received 2 talents goes and he makes 2 more so he has 4. And the one who had 1 talent is afraid of his master, and he goes and he buries it in the dirt. And he comes back with this 1 talent. And you remember when he's making reckoning with them. The first one delivers 10. He says, well done, you good and faithful servant. And the second one delivers the 4. And he says, well done, you good and faithful servant. And then the third one comes up with his 1 single talent that he'd had from the very beginning. He said, Lord, I knew you were a hard man, reaping where you had not sown. And so I went and I saved this 1 talent for you so that you could have it. Here it is. And you remember what he said? You wicked and slothful servant. Matthew 25 and verse 26. You knew that I reaped where I had not sown and gathered where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was mine with at least interest. Saving and investing. Oh, remember what Dwayne Wilson, we had him several years ago come and do a financial seminar. And he said how we manage our money means more to our bottom line than the amount of money that we make. How we manage our money. And that includes saving and investing for the future. Of course, our treasure is not to be laid up here on this earth. Our treasure is laid up in heaven. But then again, money shouldn't be our treasure, brethren. And so it's okay to make savings and investments for future retirements. Thirdly, we can use our money for giving. After we have given to the church, there is still an expectation of the individual to give alms to the poor. Think about what Jesus said in Matthew 6, beginning in verse 2. He says, thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as do the hypocrites do in the synagogue and in the streets. They may do it to be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give, notice it's not a conditional, if you give. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. There's an expectation that we're going to give of ourselves even to those who are poor. You say, well, I want to do all my giving through the church. Well, that's a nice sentiment. But you're going to run into people that need something right now. One day you're going to be pumping gas at a gas station. And there's going to be a mother who's got a child that is sick in the car and trying to get the doctor and is asking for $5 in gas to help her get to the doctor. Well, I give all my money at the church. That's like saying, go, be warmed and filled. James says, what good is that? We need to be willing and ready and willing to give, even in those circumstances where we're outside of the church, to give individually. But not do so by sounding the trumpet. Notice, there's a way that we give. We don't sound the trumpet. Look at me, I helped the young lady with the baby going to the doctor. Everyone, look at me, I've done a great thing. Well, number one, you've done what you're supposed to do. And number two, you're not supposed to do it with the sounding of the trumpet. We can give it. And we need to be exemplifying this for our children. Teaching our children what to spend money on, how to save money, and how to give money away. Because we're expected to give to those who are in need and those around us who do not have what we have. It reflects a heart of compassion. It reflects a heart of selflessness. So we give to the church, but we also give individually to those who are in need. So the question then comes down to us, what does our checkbook say about our lives? When we open that register, does it reveal something about us that may need to change? Places that we need to stay away from? Or things that we need to start giving to? Living kingdom first in this world means that we are not living world first in our checkbook. Does it say that you are keeping up with the Joneses or that you are laying up your treasures in heaven? And brethren, it isn't about doctoring the books to make it look like you have the right priorities. It's about having the right priorities to begin with, and it reflects those. And the right priorities begin with being in the right place. There's only two places, really, when it comes right down to it, there's just two places: the church and the world. Are you in the right place? You can't straddle the fence. You cannot be almost in the church. The Lord, when you're saved, will add you to His church when you obey the gospel. Have you accepted the riches of His grace? No amount of money can measure up to the riches of God's grace, and He offers it to each one of us. He offers it to you tonight if you're not a child of God, if you're not a Christian. He welcomes you. He wants you. Maybe you are a child of God, and you've been betrayed by your own checkbook. Isn't it time to come back and embrace the ideals of God and live them out every day? We would ask that if you have to respond to God's invitation, that you would do so tonight. Don't put it off. Make your life right tonight while we stand and while we sing.